How big is the US actually? I'm from Germany, and from what I heard, Germany is around 28 times smaller than the US. And yeah, that means Germany's not very big. And that also means the US must be gigantic. Well, how big it really is in comparison, let's find out.
Is currently the world's sole superpower with military installations around the world. As a country, its geography spans from subtropical forests to rolling plains, scorching deserts, and Arctic wastes. But just how big is the US really in comparison to the rest of the world? Hello and welcome to another episode of the Infographics Show. Today, we're taking a look at how big the US really is. The US is approximately...
Before we go in, I've been to the States 3 times myself. I've been to some big places, like San Francisco, Las Vegas, LA, and New York City. And every time I was in one of those cities, I mean, it's nothing like we have here. It's gigantic, and that's just one city. Now, I know New York is gigantic, but the U.S., I mean, when we say, it's 2 hours away from here, somewhere it's like, oh my God, we had planned for that for a week. But when you guys say, oh, it's just 2 hours away, you always use the word just, which, I mean, if you compare the size, makes sense because it's nothing.
Approximately 5,680,000 square miles,
Jesus.
With terrain that varies dramatically. Only Russia at 10.6 million square miles
Canada.
and Canada at 6,205,000 square miles are larger than the U.S. Its 3 biggest states, Alaska at 663,000 square miles,
Probably Texas as well, and maybe California.
Texas at 270,000 square miles, and California at 160,000 square miles, combined would be the 17th largest nation in the world, immediately after Sudan at 1.15 million square miles,
Jesus.
and right before Libya at 1 million square miles. In total, the U.S. is larger than the 107 smallest countries in the world combined. With about 327 million people, the United States is also the 3rd most populated nation on Earth, having a total of 4.28% of the total world population, with a net yearly migration rate of approximately 900,000 people.
Just in comparison, even though Germany is much, much smaller, I think Germany has around 83 million people at the moment. So, US is 28 times larger, but only has 4 times the amount of people.
The U.S. is by far the one place the rest of the world wants to live, with Germany coming in second at 350,000 migrants, and Turkey in third with 325,000 migrants. In the U.S., 83% of the population lives in cities, with its 3 most populated cities being New York City with 8.5 million people, Los Angeles with 4 million people, and Chicago with 2.7 million people.
I didn't know that.
All combined, the population of the U.S.'s 3 biggest cities is equal to the population of Chad with 14.5 million people. Just these 3 cities alone are also more populated than Cuba with 11.5 million people, Belgium with 11.3 million people, and Greece with 11.2 million people. When counting the greater metro...
It's actually funny. One thing you guys might not know about me is I'm German. I got the German passport and all, but I'm actually partly Greek. I have a Greek last name.
Metropolitan area, New York City is the 10th largest city in the world, with a total population of 18.6 million people, just behind Cairo with 18.8 million people, and just ahead of Dhaka with 17.6 million people. This would make the greater New York City area the 63rd largest country in the world, just ahead of Syria with 18 million people. The U.S. is the world's largest economy with a gross domestic product of $20.4 trillion, or 23.3% of the total global economy.
Jesus.
China is just behind the U.S. at $14 trillion and 16.1% of the total global economy. When measured by purchasing power parity, or the price of goods and services versus individual incomes, the U.S. comes at number 2 to China, whose GDP PPP is $25.2 trillion. This means that while the Chinese economy is about 30% smaller than the US's, Chinese individuals have on average 20% greater purchasing power in their own country. The 3 biggest economies within the U.S. states are California with a GDP of $2.6 trillion, Texas with a GDP...
How many of you guys are actually from the States? I would be really curious that I'm watching this. to me, the reason I chose this video is because I've been to the States a couple of times, and so I know a little bit about it. But where are you guys from? I would be very curious. Are you actually from one of those big cities? I've talked to many people. I've talked to people from LA, or to California, New York, Florida, Texas, but I've never talked to anyone from Alaska, for example. But I did have a subscriber the other day who said that they were from Chicago.
GDP of $1.6 trillion, and New York with a GDP of $1.5 trillion. Altogether, these three states would be the world's third largest economy, just ahead of Japan with a GDP of $5 trillion. California's economy alone is as big as the United Kingdom's, Texas's is as big as Canada's, and New York's is as big as South Korea's. The United States also has the best equipped military in the world, though it's only the third largest at 1,282,000 active duty personnel. Ahead of it are India with 1.4 million active duty personnel.
Well, but India has 1.23 billion people as well.
And China with 2.1 million active duty personnel. The US spends over $610 billion on its military every year, or 3.1% of its total GDP. 35% of the world's total military expenditure, and more than the next 9 nations combined. Just behind it are China with $150 billion in expenditures and Saudi Arabia with $76 billion in expenditures. The United States also has the most military bases in the most foreign countries in the world, with approximately 8.
That's true. Actually, I know that there are a lot of garrisons here in Germany, like Wiesbaden or Ramstein, for example. There's a lot of Air Force and Army mainly. Yeah, I actually know about that.
100 military installations in 80 countries, possibly more military bases in more foreign lands than any nation or empire in history. The cost of maintaining these bases alone is about $156 billion, more than China spends on its entire military. On the civilian side, the U.S. has the world's third largest police force, with 913,000 total police officers, placing it just behind India at number 1 with 1.9 million police officers, and China with 1.6 million police officers.
Oh my God.
In the realm of healthcare, the U.S. is the most expensive nation on earth, with a health expenditure per capita of $10,350, placing it ahead of Switzerland at $7,900 and Germany at $5,550. While on average the rest of the world spends about 10.3% of its GDP on healthcare, the US spends 18% of its GDP on healthcare. The United States is a large, complex nation, big enough to host several different distinct accents within its own borders. Its people are hardworking and industrious.
See, that's so funny with different accents, yeah, 100%. See, here's the thing, when I was in the States, there's a certain place, at some point I'm going to post a video about it, where I don't think I have the strongest German accent, but there was a place inside the States, specifically a fast food restaurant where I went to, both in California and both in New York, and that was the only place where people were not understanding my accent. It was the same chain.
Is leading the world's economy, but despite what recent political events might indicate, they're also the most welcoming nation in the world, with 3 times the number of immigrants than nations in either the number 2 or number 3 spot in a global comparison.
Damn, the US is gigantic. It's very difficult to to find out how big it really is if you're just a small human, right, and you're just walking around. I mean, you can be in a big city and spend weeks just walking around and not even getting close to seeing everything that it has, right? So these things can only be measured. I mean, not only be really. It's almost impossible to even understand or even get a. I guess unless you've been. Unless you've been to the on the moon, or unless you've been in the in space, it would be very difficult to comprehend how big it really is, right? But I would be interested, guys. I mean, what country are you from? Are you guys from the States? And are you living in one of the big cities? Would be very curious. I've been to the States many times myself, and every time I was there, I had a good ass time. So if you guys want to hear the story about where people just weren't able to understand my accent, write me in the comments and I'll let you know. Other recommendations on what I should watch more about the US, I would very, very much recommend it. Guys, thank you very much. Have a good one. Bye.